Welcome to the Battlefield to Blessing podcast. I'm Charl. Wonderful to have you listening in with us again today as we talk about the issues of PTSD and related issues. And we have Colin with us again. Colin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Charles. Good to be here.
Colin, you've had quite a bit of experience in dealing with people that have been traumatized in various ways over many years. Mm-hmm. You've been counseling people as a pastor, and you've also dealt with them physically in a more clinical environment, I would think.
Yeah, complementary health practice.
There we go.
Yeah.
So I want to just deal with some of the issues that people struggle with, and literally they're probably issues that all of us struggle with at some stage in our lives, because I don't think that there's a human on earth who hasn't had some kind of trauma, and maybe not completely in the realm of hyper PTSD type issues. But let's just chat about some of the ideas that most of us deal with. So issues like feeling isolated, and we want to withdraw socially and that sort of thing. I'm sure you've come across people like that in your counseling sessions over the years. What causes that sort of thing? Why would somebody who's normally happy and friendly and having fun go through a period like this of wanting to withdraw, not opening up to their friends, and backing off?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose so many things can cause that kind of thing in somebody's life.
Sure.
Maybe one of the reasons is that they've don't think other people can relate. Maybe they've been through something and you can't relate. And so they feel pointless. It's pointless speaking about it.
Trying to explain all the time.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I know coming back from, that story, you go overseas to do some mission work or something, and it's quite a different situation. You come back home, man, you can't explain it.
That's right.
You've got to be there to experience what you're talking about.
Yes.
It can be quite frustrating.
Yeah. And I think a lot of our listeners are those who have been in war zones or on the front line of missions, or even first responders.
Yeah.
And in fact, we have 60% of our listeners are actually women who might have husbands that are in those fields, or they themselves have been in those fields. So they've come across these ideas and struggled with them.
Yeah.
But I've had friends, that were paratroopers and that in the past, who said, when you come back into civilian life, you cannot explain to anybody what you've been through in a war zone. There's no way they can comprehend it. And so you live with all this baggage yourself, and with nobody you can share it with.
Yeah, exactly. So you tend to isolate yourself.
That's right.
Get a bit down. You're not speaking to anybody, and that of course just makes things even worse.
Sure, it doesn't help. That's right.
It doesn't help.
Yeah. When friends try and come alongside somebody that's struggling like that, knowing that there's no way they can understand what the person's been through, what advice would you give the friend? What would you tell them to do?
That's somebody who comes across somebody like
yes,
that. Okay.
Or your friend has been through this.
Yeah.
You know that you could never understand it. You've never had this experience in your life, but you also want to be there for your friend. So what do? Do you just pray for them? Do you just talk to them? Do you ask questions? Do you keep quiet, hoping they'll come out with something?
Yeah. No, I think I would encourage the person, if I can see that they're battling with it, I would encourage them to speak to their loved one or their friend and say, talk to me about it as much as you want to. I might not get it. I might not understand everything, but talk, because I'm here for you,
Yes.
I'm somebody who's battled with depression through my life. It comes and goes. And I was really down at one stage. And when you're like that, you can't explain why. It's very hard to explain why. You just know that you're oblique, And all that a friend did was he saw that I was like that. He comes from another town, and he said, I'll meet you halfway. Let's meet for breakfast. And that's all he did. And we just had breakfast together, hung out together. And the fact that this person simply said, I want to make myself available for you today,
that was
meant everything. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he probably didn't have all the answers, and you didn't have all the questions, or either way
Absolutely.
around.
It
But
wasn't even that we spoke a lot about how I was feeling. It was just to know that
they
somebody
were
was
available.
there. Yeah.
And they cared. They cared enough
exactly.
to drive to another town to spend time with you.
Yeah, I'll never forget that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the fact that we're talking about it now is a big deal, you know.
Yeah, it was.
And so when you went through times like that, you know, from your own personal experience, are other people are they irritating to you if they're trying to reach out to you all the time? Because, you know, when you've spoken to people that have had trauma like this, some of them are actually quite upset about friends who are sending them little prayers and little Bible notes and verses and that sort of thing. And I'm thinking, well, you know, you're in trouble if you don't do anything, and you're in trouble when you do something.
Yeah, it's a fine line. Hey?
That's right.
Personally, I'm not one who likes getting all these little verses and things. I prefer the actual contact with people. But I know that, you know, some people, the right thing at the right time might be exactly what God wants to use. So it's not like you say, don't do these things, but just be sensitive, you know. It's not so much reminding people of a nice picture and a verse. It's rather the personal contact, even if you're not there, phoning them, you know, just talking.
Yeah,
I don't particularly like those little messages.
Yes. It's quite interesting because I think everybody has their love language, as they call
exactly.
it. You know,
but that's me personally.
That's what I'm saying. For instance, I've got a family member who's just lost their job, and so the question to me was, should I phone them or should I write them an encouraging SMS, a text message? And I opted for the text message because I thought it's more permanent. Yes, they can delete it immediately, but if they want to keep that little bit of encouragement, they can.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm speaking over the phone, they can't just always remember what you said. And
you're right.
And so
that's a good idea, Charl.
And so, you know, it just depends on the situation. Obviously, if you don't have time to think out a text message of encouragement, then make a quick call, you know, if you're on the run. But either way, I don't think it's right to just keep quiet and not do anything just because you might make a mistake.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I think you can always preempt, you know, a conversation. If you're totally honest, you can say, "Listen, I don't know what you've gone through. I can't imagine it. But I just want you to know that if you do want to talk, I'm here. I don't know what I'll be able to say, but just know that I really appreciate you. And I'm here as a friend."
That's right.
That's it.
I've literally written that to people before.
Yeah, be honest.
I actually don't know what to say to you, but just know that, you know, we're praying for you, we're thinking about you or whatever. And I think that kind of honesty actually goes a long way. Yeah. People, if the recipient of your blessing doesn't want to accept it, that's not your problem. You've reached out, you know, and I think you've done the right thing then.
You have, and you've opened a door. It might be a time when they feel like they would like to talk, you know.
Yes, that's right. No, we have a lot of listeners, as we said, who are soldiers or former soldiers or vets, as they call it, veterans and that sort of thing. And this might sound very soppy and very emotional and what have you. But the point is that there's a time where we have to put all this heroic ideas aside because we're all human. And God has placed us in a world, and He has commanded us to serve others. And so we've got to ask ourselves, literally, what does that look like in the circumstances we are in, or the recipient of the service or the blessing that we need to give? And I think our challenge is often that we're waiting for that person to reach out to us, especially the kinds of people that we are. I mean, you've been in the Defence Force.
Yes, I have.
And you've been on the front line of battle in the spiritual realm, being a pastor and counseling and that sort of thing. But how does one deal with things like guilt and shame that might be related to the traumatic events?
Yeah.
Because sometimes I've spoken to people who've been completely traumatized by certain events. It wasn't their fault. They had nothing to do with it. They were I don't want to use the word attack because it always wasn't a physical attack, but they were traumatized through somebody else's negligence or sin or chaos in the other person's life,
And yet they feel
and they're
ashamed.
feeling shamed, and they're feeling guilty for something that wasn't their issue.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting, eh?
Isn't it? It's fascinating.
Yeah.
We complicated people.
Absolutely. You know how many people who have spoken to me in my practice who have been abused as a kid, even a teenager, and it's still with them, and they're sometimes in their 50s, 60s, 70s. It's incredible how long that kind of thing can still bother people and affect their relationships. And most of the time, there's a sense of shame involved, although they were not the perpetrators of that.
They were the victim.
They were the victim, but it's a kind of a dirtiness or shame involved with that, which they cannot shake. So I had one lady who, she must have been in her 70s, and she was a therapist herself in some kind of medical practice. And she was coming to see me, and a lot of her pains and her illnesses were not going away. And it doesn't matter what we were doing, what talking we were doing. And it turns out that when she was a kid, she was molested, okay, repeatedly by a family member. It's a typical story, actually, sadly enough. But now her husband, they've been married for many years. Her husband, for instance, the other night, he rolled over in the bed and put his arm around her, and she was just dropping off to sleep. And she jumped up. It was a shock to feel that. And she jumped up and actually had to run to the bathroom to get sick. And this is her husband after many years.
Yes.
It's still affecting her from way back then. This
That is
feeling
incredible.
of sort of uninvited touch, you know?
Yes,
Even
unexpected.
Unexpected.
Probably a bit of a
Yeah.
fright involved in it too. Yeah.
So, you know, I'm speaking to her and she's saying, well, I've tried this therapy, I've tried that, I've been to psychologists, psychiatrists, and nothing's working. And I've tried all these things. And my comment to her was, you've tried to hand it over. You've tried to give it away, you know, to some kind of technique of making yourself feel better. But it always seems to come back, you know. And so we started to talk about God. And I'm saying to her that God is not a technique, you know. It's a relationship. So when you hand things over to him, what comes back at you is a caring relationship. It's not just handing things into a void of some technique, some psychological technique. You have a relationship where healing can actually happen. Yeah, so it's personal.
Yeah.
It's
So,
personal.
yeah. How does that look for somebody in those circumstances? You've just told us there is hope.
Yeah.
And what would it look like for a lady under those circumstances? Does she pray? Does she reach out? Does she read a Bible? Does she, you know, because you don't want to go back into that void of faith that isn't grasping onto anything
Yeah.
permanent.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, that lady did not respond. And I know that she's still not doing well. But the way forward with that would be to spend time with that person and read with them, pray with them, do all of those things you said. But it's really a renewal of the mind, as we were talking about in one of our previous podcasts. So it's helping people out of a mindset and a worldview that you are alone in this world, that you've got to manage everything, you know.
Everything depends on you.
Yeah, you know, that kind of thing. Or there might be some meditation I can do, and I've got no problem with that. Christians meditate, you know, and it's a great practice. But if we're in a worldview, and our understanding is that we are meant to shape up, and we're meant to handle things, and we're meant to be growing up and being independent, where do we get that from? We're meant to be interdependent on each other and on God. So we're in a world where God has made us for a purpose. He doesn't leave us to do that. He wants to walk through this world with us. And very often we feel we're alone and isolated in our problems as well.
Can that isolation lead to anger or irritability? It does too.
Oh, yeah. So anger is one of the biggest emotions for body illnesses and chronic pain.
Even related to pain.
Yeah. Anger is the biggest one. It's an unresolved emotion. Resentment, anger, disappointment, but mostly anger, funny enough.
Goodness me.
Yeah.
Well, my friends, we're speaking to Colin. Colin's a past pastor, a missionary, complementary health practitioner, got a lot of experience in this world of PTSD and other related ideas that people struggle with. And we're mainly looking at the sort of spiritual side today, but we're also touching on the physical side of the stress and the trauma that people go through. Colin, we've just mentioned the anger and the irritability and what a challenge that is, but there's also things like anxiety and people that are struggling, looking towards the future, loss of interest in activities which people would normally get really excited about. My young daughter, she says to me, when I dance, I just feel so happy. but there are people that do feel happy like that, and then they've got a complete loss of interest in that world of maybe sport, or it might even be something like a Bible study, possibly, where there's just a complete loss of interest in everything, and a real challenge, to the person. As you say, lots of the time they're victims. They're not the perpetrator of the challenges that they're dealing with.
Absolutely. I mean, you can say all the right things to yourself sometimes, but somebody who's really battling with these kind of things, there's a kind of a bleakness that comes over you, a darkness, where it's very difficult to get out of that. I can't prescribe drugs, and I don't always want to do that or advise that. But I know that sometimes going to see the right person who can help you just to get over that vicious cycle and out of that depth, so that you can at least start talking to somebody. You don't have this feeling in your head all the time that nobody will understand me, this world is rubbish, there's no way out. You sometimes need to get out of that little cycle so that you can start to get help.
Sure.
And believe that you can be helped. Yeah.
And we've been dealing a lot now just talking about the victim, but we also have perpetrators who are dealing with the same issues. They're traumatized. They might not have thought clearly through the issues that they're dealing with, and they found themselves in circumstances they acted in a way which now they're ashamed of. And we know there's hope for the victim, but is there also hope for the perpetrator?
There is hope, yes. That's the thing, we know that God forgives and He forgives the worst of sinners. And all of us are capable of the worst of sins. We've all got corrupt hearts. Given the best opportunities, we sometimes don't realize that. But in the worst opportunities, we can perpetrate these things. And there is a God who forgives. Not only that, who helps us to restore those relationships again. I know you've done similar things, Charl. The people that were attacking others, innocent people, you've gone and spoken to them and offered forgiveness. I mean, that must go a long way,
Yes.
And that's a person to a person. And to know that for all eternity, you are not only forgiven, you are able to be restored. And your shame can turn into honor, really. Do you know that we're all shameful people? And
yes, we are.
When we
That's right.
when we do something that's shameful, we are actually making, if we call ourselves Christians, now let me talk from that perspective, or even human beings, we are actually shaming the face of God, because God made us in His image. And so, I think part of our restoration is to realize that we can be honest, so that we don't have to try and become the victim or lie about our circumstances to justify our actions. We can actually be honest about it. And that's when we actually are honoring God. And what God does in response to that honesty and that repentance is He honors us. He doesn't just forgive us, He honors us as His children. And that's a huge way forward. in people who have been perpetrators or shamed in some way.
Let's just quickly move into that realm in the family situation. Family always seems to be so much more difficult to deal with than people that might be living far away, or somebody you came across, once in your lifetime and things didn't go well, and that sort of thing. Dealing with this forgiveness in the family and the idea of reconciliation, can one have that forgiveness but also not experience the reconciliation that you've been speaking about?
You mean that they're able to forgive?
Yes. In other words, can a victim forgive and not struggle with bitterness or hatred or whatever, but that there can be no reconciliation? Well, let's say the person died.
Yeah, very often.
They died.
Yes.
You can't reconcile with them. They don't exist anymore.
Well, there's one case. Yeah, exactly. So, from another personal story, I went through a very, very difficult time in another town that I lived in. And it was like people that were really trying to make my life miserable and tough. So for a long time after that, I didn't want to see them. I didn't even want to be anywhere near them, because I knew it wasn't going to be good for me or the situation. So after a while, I said to God, I want to write these people's names down, and I want to get rid of this piece of paper as a kind of an enacted forgiveness. I forgive them. I'm done with this. And after I wrote the names down, it is as if the Lord said to me, no, I want you to keep that paper. I want to put it in your Bible. And when you open your Bible and you see that piece of paper, I want you to pray for them. It wasn't
that's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, I want you to pray for them. And it is as if he made it clear to me that those people that hurt you are just people. And how do you know that I haven't already worked in their life? How do you know that they haven't already started changing, and yet you're holding this bitterness towards them? It's almost like Satan is keeping you down while God's working in other people.
Somebody else's life.
So I forgave them and moved on with that, knowing that, I'm actually the one that's battling here with my non-forgiveness. But when I'd forgiven them, strangely enough, an opportunity arose for me to be in their company. And it was so much easier, this kind of thing. But the other people I hadn't seen, so there was no chance to reconcile and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I've had to realize I can leave that in God's hands. He's still working with them. He's working with me. And we need to deal with our own hearts.
Yeah, I think that's so important, is that we're always looking to God to try and fix other people. But we also need to be fixed.
Yeah,
yes, and
definitely.
And that's the big thing.
Definitely.
Well, Colin, it's been fascinating chatting to you. Thank you very much for this, and thank you for your personal stories. It's really encouragement for those of us who are going through these ideals and trying to work through things ourselves. So I really appreciate that. Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed our chat today. Hope you learned something from it, and keep on fighting the good fight of faith. Josh, thanks so much for your help with the podcast.